What would you do if you woke up to your wife moaning another man's name? If, after months of sacrifice and deployment, you returned home to discover your only son wasn't yours? For one highly decorated Texas soldier, that moment shattered everything. A whispered name, a late-night phone call, and a truth so devastating it sent him over the edge. By morning, his family was destroyed, his hands were stained, and his fate was sealed. But what really happened inside that house? Stay with us as we uncover the dark secrets, the devastating betrayal, and the crime that left an entire town in shock. The Texas heat hung thick in the air as Staff Sergeant Ryan Walker pulled into his driveway, the weight of 11 months overseas melting away at the sight of home. This was it, the moment he had dreamed of through countless sleepless nights in a foreign desert. No more sand, no more war, just family. Before he could even shut off the engine, the front door burst open. Emily ran toward him, her sundress flowing as she closed the distance, eyes glistening with tears. Noah followed close behind, his tiny legs wobbling as he sprinted toward the father he hadn't seen in nearly a year. Ryan barely had time to brace himself before Emily crashed into his arms, clutching him as if she never wanted to let go. "You're home," she whispered against his chest, her voice thick with emotion. Noah tugged at his pant leg, his small arms reaching upward. "Daddy, you came back." Ryan swallowed hard, lifting his son effortlessly, pressing a kiss against his forehead. "I told you I would, buddy. I always do." Everything felt perfect, just as it should be. Inside, the house looked the same furniture, the same faint scent of Emily's perfume. Over dinner, laughter filled the air as Noah babbled excitedly about his toys, stuffing bites of mashed potatoes into his mouth between words. Ryan reached across the table, taking Emily's hand in his, squeezing it gently. She smiled, a real, genuine smile. That night, when they lay in bed together, her body curled against his, Ryan let out a deep breath. This was home. This was everything. For the first time in months, he slept soundly. The first signs were easy to ignore, little things. Emily was always on her phone. Not unusual, except she never used to be this attached to it. It was always nearby, always face down. If it buzzed while they were together, she silenced it immediately. Then came the hesitation. When Ryan pulled her close when he kissed her, she responded, but something was missing. A delay in her touch, a stiffness in her body. Like muscle memory, not emotion. One night he leaned in, brushing his lips against her neck. She flinched. Just for a second. It was barely noticeable, but Ryan noticed. He always noticed. "You okay?" he murmured. Emily forced a smile, brushing his hair back. "Of course, just getting used to you being home again." He nodded, pretending to believe it, but the feeling in his gut told him otherwise. Ryan hadn't even been home a full day before James showed up. Welcome back, brother, his best friend, his brother in arms. James had been more than a friend, he had been family. They had survived deployments together, looked out for one another when things got tough. When Ryan left, James had promised to take care of Emily and Noah, to keep an eye on them, and he had. Too well. At first, Ryan was grateful. James had stepped up, helped with housework, played with Noah, made sure Emily wasn't alone. A true friend. But then he never seemed to leave. At first, he came by a few times a week, then it was almost daily. He knew where everything was in the house, things Ryan himself had forgotten. He brought Emily coffee without asking how she liked it. He played with Noah like a father would. And Emily? She laughed at his jokes in a way Ryan hadn't seen in a long time. One night, sitting in the living room, Ryan watched as James tossed Noah into the air, the boy giggling uncontrollably. Emily smirked. "He really does look like you, James." Ryan's breath hitched. James chuckled, but it wasn't his usual laugh, it was forced, uncomfortable. Ryan glanced at Emily, expecting her to correct herself, to laugh it off. She didn't. She just took a sip of wine, her eyes never meeting Ryan's. Something wasn't right, and for the first time since he came home, he didn't feel like he belonged. If you've made it this far, you're clearly as deep into this story as we are. Let us know where you're watching from in the comments. We see you, and we appreciate you. The night was thick with silence, pressing against the house like an unseen force. The air was still, heavy, untouched, except for the empty space beside him. It wasn't noise that woke him, it was the absence of something. Emily. His hand reached across the bed, fingers stretching toward where she should be. Instead of warmth, he met only cold sheets. His eyes snapped open, a quiet unease coiled in his chest. He turned his head, scanning the dimly lit room. The soft glow of the streetlights filtered through the curtains, casting long, unmoving shadows on the walls. She wasn't there. Ryan sat up, his heartbeat steady but his breath coming slower, deeper, controlled. He listened. Nothing. Then, a sound, software muffled, from down the hall. Ryan moved without a sound, his bare feet gliding over the wooden floor. Years of training had taught him to listen first, act later. A soldier's instincts never dulled. As he stepped into the hallway, a faint golden glow spilled from the slightly open bathroom door. Then he heard it, a whisper. His muscles tensed, his body went still. And then, her voice, low, breathy, intimate. James. His breath hitched. The name felt foreign, out of place. Wrong. His grip tightened against the doorframe, fingers pressing into the wood. Did he mishear? The doubt lingered for only a second. Then she said it again. James, I can't stop thinking about you. His stomach twisted. His mind scrambled for explanations, excuses, anything to rewrite what he had just heard. Maybe it was a dream. Maybe he misunderstood. Maybe dash. Then a soft laugh, a sigh, and then the final blow. I love you. His breath stalled. His jaw tightened, his pulse drumming in his ears. He felt his grip on the doorframe tighten so hard his knuckles whitened. The bathroom fan hummed in the background, drowning out the quiet devastation sinking into his bones. Emily's voice had softened now, murmuring something else, something he no longer wanted to hear. Ryan took a step back. His body moved with discipline, but his mind was burning. The hallway stretched before him, dark and quiet, as if the world outside this moment remained unchanged. But he knew better, because some words once spoken cannot be unheard. Some betrayals once revealed cannot be undone. He turned away, stepping back into the bedroom, the warmth of the sheets now meaningless. He sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor. The name still pounded in his mind, relentless, inescapable. James. James. A slow, steady exhale left his lips. Not a sigh, an adjustment. Because now he knew, and nothing would ever be the same. Ryan moved like a ghost through his own home, his breath shallow, his body numb. His mind wasn't racing anymore. It was slowing down, sharpening, calculating. His heartbeat, once erratic, now pounded with a steady, dangerous rhythm. He reached the kitchen, barely registering the smooth feel of the countertop under his fingertips as he steadied himself. The world around him felt unreal, detached, distant. But the glow of a phone screen on the counter, that was real. Emily's phone, unlocked, left open. Ryan stared at it for a second, the pull of curiosity and dread tightening in his chest like a vice. He shouldn't look. He didn't want to look. But he did. And there it was. Does he still think the kid is his? He has no clue. I told you the doctor said years ago he couldn't have kids. I had to do what I had to do. Ryan blinked, but the words didn't change. Noah. His son. His little boy. Not his. His breath hitched, a sharp, suffocating inhale as a crushing weight settled on his chest. Everything inside him twisted, cracked, broke. The child he had fought for. The child he had dreamed of coming home to. The child he had loved unconditionally from the moment he first held him in his arms. A lie. His hands tightened around the phone, his knuckles turning white, the edges of the screen pressing into his palm. He scrolled, his thumb moving before his mind even registered it. He needed more. He needed the full truth. Ryan exhaled sharply, his breath uneven, his pulse hammering. They were laughing at him. The betrayal wasn't just physical, it wasn't just one mistake. This was planned, this was deception, this was a game. James hadn't just taken his wife, he had taken his family, his home, his future, his very existence. And Ryan had been nothing more than a blind, devoted fool, fighting wars overseas while his best friend played husband in his absence. He placed the phone back on the counter, slowly, deliberately. His breathing was calm now, too calm. A soldier's instinct is to act, to eliminate threats. And right now, standing in the quiet darkness of his own home, Ryan Walker knew one thing with absolute certainty. He was looking at the battlefield, and the enemy was closer than he had ever imagined. The bathroom door creaked open, steam curling into the dimly lit hallway. Emily stepped out, wrapped in a towel, humming softly to herself. She ran a hand through her damp hair, completely unaware that she was walking straight into the moment that would change everything. Then she stopped. Ryan stood in the darkened hallway, motionless, his broad frame partially shrouded in shadows. His eyes locked onto hers, not with love, not with warmth, but with something else entirely. The only light in the hall came from the glow of her phone screen in his hand. It flickered across his face, illuminating the raw, hollow expression he wore. Emily's breath hitched. A pulse of fear flashed in her eyes. Ryan had seen the messages. He didn't need to say anything, she already knew. Her mouth opened, but no words came. Her mind scrambled for an excuse, an explanation, anything. But it was too late for that. His voice cut through the silence, low, measured, dangerously calm. "Who is he?" Emily swallowed hard. "Ryan, Who is he?" His grip on the phone tightened, the muscles in his jaw flexing. She took a slow step back, her heart pounding against her ribs. She had never seen him like this before. "Ryan, listen, it's not what you think. I was going to—" But she saw it. The screen still glowing in his hand, the messages spelled out every dirty, undeniable truth. Her stomach twisted. She couldn't lie her way out of this. Ryan stepped forward, a slow, deliberate step. "Say his name, Emily." She flinched. "Please, just listen." The phone flew from his hand before she could finish. It hit the wall with a sharp crack, the screen shattering, pieces clattering onto the hardwood floor. Emily gasped, her body jerking at the sudden explosion of anger. She turned to run, but Ryan was faster. Before she could take another step, his hand shot out, grabbing her by the wrist. "Ryan, stop!" she screamed, twisting against his grip, but he yanked her back hard, sending her stumbling against the wall. The picture frames along the hallway rattled from the force. One slipped, crashing to the floor. Ryan's face was mere inches from hers now, his breath hot against her skin. "How long?" His voice was barely a whisper, but it carried more weight than a scream. Emily shook her head rapidly. "Ryan, please, just let me explain." His hand slammed against the wall beside her, trapping her in place. "How long, Emily?" Tears welled in her eyes. "A year," she choked out. "But it didn't mean—" His head tilted slightly, his nostrils flaring. "A year?" His voice cracked. His knuckles whitened as his hands pressed harder against the wall. The rage simmering beneath his skin boiled over. With one swift motion, he grabbed her by the shoulders and flung her backward. Emily yelped as she crashed into the hallway table, the lamp teetering before toppling to the floor, shattering on impact. Ryan stood over her, chest heaving. His whole body trembled with something raw, untamed. Emily scrambled to her feet, backing away toward the bedroom. "I'm sorry," she sobbed. "Please, I never meant—" But the words barely registered. Ryan couldn't hear her anymore. All he saw was James. All he saw was Noah. All he saw was a lie so massive it had consumed his entire life. The rage didn't just control him now, it became him. And the next moments, a blur of movement, a scream that never finished, the sound of something, someone, hitting the ground. Then silence, a silence that would never be broken again. If you've made it this far, you're clearly as deep into this story as we are. Let us know where you're watching from in the comments. We see you and we appreciate you. A clock ticked, slow, unforgiving. Somewhere in the house, water dripped. a steady rhythm against porcelain. Each drop streaked red before spiraling down the drain. Ryan sat against the hallway wall, his breath shallow, his fingers trembling. His mind was a fog, his body numb. The distant wail of sirens sliced through the silence, drawing closer. A recording played, his own voice fractured and hollow. She lied, she lied. A pause, a sharp inhale. I didn't know. I didn't know. The words echoed through the empty space around him. He wasn't even sure if he had spoken them aloud or if they just lived in his head now, looping endlessly. Then, flashing lights, doors slamming, boots pounding against pavement. The front door swung open. Officers flooded inside, their movements precise, controlled. The house was eerily untouched. A picture-perfect home. Framed photos on the wall. The dining table set for two. Then, the hallway. The blood led them forward. Ryan didn't flinch when they reached him. He just stared, eyes vacant, body motionless. Beside him, a rolling pin lay abandoned, its wooden surface smeared dark. An officer crouched beside him, studying the stillness in his face. A hand hovered over his shoulder, hesitant. Ryan finally blinked. Slowly, his gaze lifted, his lips parted. And then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said the only thing that mattered. It was all a lie. The weight of those words hung in the air, settling over the room like dust. And somewhere beyond the flashing lights, the night stretched on, unchanged. The interrogation. The room was cold, not just in temperature but in feeling, sterile, empty, detached. Ryan sat motionless at the metal table, his wrists stiff in steel cuffs. His fingers lay still against the surface, his gaze unfocused. A camera watched from the corner, its red light blinking. The door creaked open. A detective stepped inside. A folder hit the table. A chair scraped against the floor. Ryan didn't move, didn't react. Minutes passed. The air grew heavier. Beyond the two-way mirror, figures shifted, observing, waiting. But Ryan had spent years in silence before. In distant deserts, in waiting rooms, in the long, empty spaces between war and home. This was nothing. More minutes, more questions. Still, he gave them nothing. Then at last he spoke. His voice was quiet, barely more than breath. She took everything from me. Not an explanation, not a confession, and just the truth. Simple and absolute. The detective leaned in, searching for cracks in his expression. Ryan blinked once. The clock on the wall ticked, the red light on the camera flickered. A decorated Texas war hero sat beneath its gaze, his past and present colliding in the weight of his own silence. Because some things, some betrayals, were beyond words. And for the first time in his life, Ryan wasn't sure if there was anything left worth saying. The house stood still, untouched, frozen in time. In the corner of an empty nursery, a child's toy lay abandoned, collecting dust. The walls, once painted soft blue, were now stripped bare. No laughter, no warmth, just silence. A battered storage box sat in the garage, its lid barely clinging on. Inside, Ryan's military medals rested, dulled by time, their once proud shimmer now lost beneath layers of dust. The honor they represented, now forgotten, buried beneath headlines of a crime that erased everything else. A folded flag sat atop the box, a cruel reminder of the soldier he once was, once a protector, now a prisoner. A torn photograph lay among the scattered remnants of a past life. Ryan and James, once inseparable brothers in arms, now divided by more than just the jagged tear running through the middle. On a dresser, a framed wedding picture sat cracked down the center. Two smiling faces frozen in time, the glass split between them like the inevitable fate they never saw coming. And then the last image. Outside, Noah ran across the yard, his laughter bright, golden under the afternoon sun. Carefree, unburdened. A child who would grow up never knowing the man who once believed he was his father. And in a cold prison cell miles away, Ryan sat on a metal cot, staring at the cracked wedding photo in his hands. His fingers traced over the broken glass, but he didn't feel it. Because some things, once shattered, can never be put back together. Some betrayals don't just break hearts, they break lives. In the end, Ryan's story wasn't just about betrayal, It was about the weight of choices, the irreversible nature of a single moment, and the destruction left in its wake. A decorated soldier, once a man of honor, now a prisoner of his own actions. A family torn apart. A child left with questions that would never have answers. But stories like this don't just exist in headlines. They unfold behind closed doors, in whispered conversations, in the quiet unraveling of trust. The truth is, betrayal doesn't just break hearts, it breaks lives. And once the damage is done, there's no undoing it. What do you think? Was Ryan a victim of circumstance, or did he go too far? Could this have ended differently? Let's talk about it in the comments below. If you found this story gripping, hit that like button, drop a comment, and don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into the stories that captivate and haunt us. Turn on notifications so you never miss a new upload, because sometimes the truth is stranger and more devastating than fiction.